Okay, well, welcome to what is the third and final conversation in the Race and Ethnicity series. If people go to the LRC website, the liberumsconversation.org website, and they participate, this one would be called the Race and Ethnicity Wrap-Up Conversation. And it's set up a little bit differently because it assumes that people did the first conversation and the second conversation so that there's something to wrap up. So all of us did participate in the first one. First two. And so now this is more for space for those things that might be left unsaid. You know, we get into these conversations, and we've said it before, where it's like, I feel like we're just getting into it and then over. This one is more along the lines of giving space for those things that are left unsaid or those questions that are still kind of ringing around in our minds. So from the LRC website, this is what it says. So the ability to have meaningful conversations on race and ethnicity will be instrumental in developing a society that reflects the multifaceted population of this country. However, the skill is not taught in schools, it's not easily acquired, and it can be challenging unless one's a part of a diverse community comprised of members willing to intentionally share their experiences with one another for mutual growth. Most people will not have deep exposure to these conversations. The purpose of this conversation series is to help participants to increase their capacity to engage in discussions that many typically experience as polarizing. And this guide is, as I said, assumes that people participated in the earlier two. So one more thing before we go into the conversation is the conversation agreements, which are be curious and open to learning, show respect, and suspend judgment wherever possible. We've been pretty good at that. Find common ground and note differences. Be authentic and welcome that from others, and be purposeful and to the point, and own and guide the conversation, which is very important because I'm obviously starting off talking, so it seems like I'm like in charge, but I'm not. It's just getting us started, and then the conversation belongs to everybody in terms of owning their reason for being here and what comes up for them. So with that said, if you all have the guide in front of you, someone can start us off on the introductions, which is getting started while we're here.
Okay. So just read the introduction section, getting started. Why are we here? What are you looking forward to in this final conversation on race and ethnicity? Do you want me to continue into the round one description, or?
Yeah, well, you can just say what you're looking forward to, or anybody else can say what they're looking forward to in this final wrap up.
Well, I guess I'm looking forward to hearing from people, perhaps whether or not they had any sort of reflections on any of the things that we discussed over the previous couple of weeks. I thought it was interesting to have two conversations, one dealing with race and then the other dealing with ethnicity, since there's frequently not a lot of distinction placed between those two concepts, even though they are distinct, albeit highly wed ideas. And just to, sort of hear any new points or insights that folks might have bubbling up in their minds that didn't come up previously. So again, looking forward to hear what you fascinating folks have to say.
So the reason I'm here, and I think I said this at the beginning, but I think it's worth restating, having listened to the conversation over the last 3 weeks, is it feels like in the United States that we're becoming more divided. It feels like we're fighting more. It feels like politics in particular is trying to divide us into all of these separate silos, and it feels that way, but I don't think it's actually true. And that's part of what I want to explore today is, like, do we have an opportunity to reverse at least that perception? Maybe it's real, maybe it's perceived. I think a lot of it's fed by social media. But, for us, leading by example, having a civil conversation, pointing out differences that we have, is there a solution in here somewhere that sort of reveals the cool thing that is it is to be an American. And I'm particularly fascinated by this. It feels like a tension, but I don't think it is at all. The difference between, you know, I was using the phrase colorblind society, and by that I'm trying to come up with a way to express the American goal of everybody is treated equally under the law, and we don't play favorites and we don't discriminate. And that is probably different now, I think I understand, than being colorblind, because people are not colorblind. We see that everybody and everything is different. And, you know, can we treat people the same on those things that matter, the rules of the game, and still sort of celebrate the fact that everybody is different, and that's what makes us cool. That's what makes us fun to be around. If everybody was just like me, it would be the most boring planet ever, and that would probably be a version of hell, and I don't want to live there.
Though we would all have great mustaches.
Anyway, that's what I had, and I joke, but I don't totally joke that the burden is on us to solve all of these problems by the end of this session.
Right. I feel the same way as Matt, just kind of wondering, like, I don't know, what's next? You know, how can we be a part of the solution, and what can we do? You know, this is nice to have these conversations here, but then what next, and how can we keep this momentum going, and what we've learned and shared here to kind of take out into our communities where we live and interact, and to make, you know, some kind of change and start some momentum. And ever since the beginning, Shannon, when you shared your background and, you know, leaving the skinhead community, and I don't know if that's relevant to today's conversation, but I would think that you would have the work that you're doing, you would have some really interesting steps to share with us, just kind of the experience of seeing people step completely out. You know, this is speaking really radical, obviously, but you know, speaking out or stepping out of these mindsets that, you know, that kind of that are very intense and radical. And, you know, I mean, if those kinds of people can change, then surely the rest of us can, you know, kind of modify our postures and our viewpoints and stuff like that. And I don't know if that is relevant to today's discussion, but if it is, I would love to hear just some, I don't know, you know, and of course you probably don't have like a formula, but from your experience, you know, with relationships and things like that, like what have you seen that maybe the rest of us that live in our own little bubbles, which I feel like I really live in a bubble, could learn from and utilize in our lives.
And if that doesn't fit in the scope of today, then I'm happy to talk with you outside of this conversation or email or.
Yes, I would love that. Okay, all right.
And I'm just looking forward to just bearing witness and listening to you all, and being challenged in my own ideas and thoughts and the way that I operate in the world. I don't know, I'm just, you know, I have really enjoyed our last couple of conversations, and felt very challenged by them, but also really hopeful that I think at the end of each of our conversations that I have felt more more similarities between us than differences, and seeing the places that we overlap in our experiences, even though we all have our own unique experiences. that I feel like there's so much more overlap in our shared experiences than there are the parts that are disparate in our experiences. And so for me, that makes me very, you know, I don't know, it's very encouraging to me that there, you know, for me, that, you know, that I routinely am just like, oh, I just want to, I just want to close my computer and turn off my phone and not continue to have to, you know, to face the world. But when I am reminded of our similarities being so overlapping, and the things that really drive us and what we all really want at the core of our humanity or whatever, that, you know, for me, it just helps me to carry on trying to do the best I can do with this one and precious life.
So for me, actually, I said this when right before we started recording. I'm feeling a little emotional right now, so you could probably see it in my eyeballs if you look close enough. I guess what I'm looking forward to in this final conversation is, I guess, on one side to remember that it may be the final conversation in terms of this series, but it doesn't have to be like the final conversation of like we're going to have in our lives, and we're going to meet other people, and we can always set up other conversations, and we can set up this conversation with 5 other groups between each of us, and then it can just expand, and more people can have these kinds of experiences. And to Shannon's point, kind of realizing the similarities that we have is, I think, a very important thing. Part of my emotion right now is because of, in part, what happened in New Zealand with the 50 people being murdered, and also the people that were injured, and the community, and all the things that come with that. And I'm kind of maybe hoping that for myself, and then maybe for whoever might listen to this in the future, that they might feel some hope in our choice to participate in this type of conversation, and to, I guess, be a part of the solution, be a part of the healing, not just because of this event, because obviously this isn't an isolated event. And the concern in my heart is that people will look at events like this and say, man, we just can't get it together. So let's all just like dig in our heels and our particular factions, because we're afraid that we may be collateral damage or get hurt because of somebody else reacting to somebody else reacting to somebody else. It's like, when will it stop, you know? And I'm gonna pull in religion just real briefly, not because I'm trying to make it religious, but just because it's the best example I could think of. It's like when Jesus was, in the stories that they tell in the church, when Jesus was about to get arrested, and one of his disciples had a sword, and he pulled out the sword and chopped off the guy's ear who was about to arrest Jesus, and he was just like, "That's it, fools! We're about to fight." And then Jesus just said, "No more of this." And like in my soul, I kind of try to hang out in that "no more of this" space, because it's real easy to want to go back and forth and fight. And I just want to be like, can't somebody just be like, "No, what? Just stop," you know? And hopefully everybody doesn't have to have like the same outcome he got, but just to be able to say, "You know what? Let's just stop. Let's just stop. We don't have, I know we've been going this way, but we don't have to. Let's just stop and do something else." So I'm hoping that I'll hear that in my own heart, which is racing, and mind is racing right now, and I'll stop inside. And then maybe someone who's checking this out later might look at it and go, "You know what? I'm going to stop. And I'm going to talk to people, and I'm not going to just kind of run on this train that seems inevitable." So that's all our introductions. So we can hit into round one. Does anybody want to volunteer to start us off with round one, and maybe read the intro, and then we can just get into the questions? Anyone?
I'm happy to
Bueller?
go. Okay. Round one. What have we learned about race and ethnicity? Remember that the goal for this living room conversation is for all of us to listen and learn about where we have different opinions and where we have shared interests, intentions, and goals. Speak from your own understanding, be open to others, be curious, seek to listen in the manner that you would like to be heard. This is a rare opportunity to speak your own stories around race and ethnicity and listen to others do the same. Answer 2 or more of the following questions as time allows. So I guess I'll just pick one out of a hat here for myself to start off with. Let's see. Is there anything that you learned from the previous 2 conversations that has changed the way you view the value of having conversations on race and ethnicity? And I think that for me, the previous 2 conversations have probably deepened my sense that these types of conversations are valuable. I mean, I already felt that they were, and already had a fair amount of experience in having them. But all of you, and Shay, who is not here, have such rich and varying personal experiences. And it was interesting to sort of listen to the nuances of your different backgrounds, and Pedro, your experience with your Portuguese father, and Shannon's remarkable story of personal transformation, and Shay with the sort of different versions of Blackness that she was raised with. It, I guess, reinforces for me a sense that on the one hand, it's probably fair to say that to get a more complete understanding of who we are and why it is we see things the way we do, it helps to have something of a nuanced appreciation of the particular differences of influence that lie in our respective personal pasts and upbringings. But on the other hand, that the reward of coming to appreciate those differences is to come to a greater realization of how it is that, fundamentally speaking, we all are sort of more or less the same, or striving for a similar sort of sense of personal dignity, of, I think, peace and contentment in terms of our relationship with our surrounding sort of social structure and the communities that we live in this country. That there is some sort of overarching pattern to our experiences and to our, as human beings and as Americans, that is perhaps big enough to fit in all of the differences in experience that we have. And so, I think the way to that understanding is just through an appreciation of the differences of our stories, so that we may observe the commonalities, underlying them. And so, yeah, I think that our dialogues have reinforced the conviction in me that these stories are necessary, and these conversations are good to have for that reason. Matt, you're muted.
These conversations. Oh, now I'm unmuted.
Now we can hear you.
Okay, number 3. Who, if any one of you, told about participating in these conversations? If no one, why not? If you have told anyone, what were some of their responses, and how did they make you feel? That opens up a whole sort of strategic can of worms for me, because I've told my colleagues at Free the People, and I've told some other people randomly, and I think some of my colleagues in particular at Blaze TV, which is a conservative media company, they're probably wondering if I've gone nuts or something. But I've been talking to my friends at Living Room Conversations for a long time about how we might expand the model. So it is absolutely true that we're all looking at each other, and even through technology, the fact that we can look each other in the eyes sort of humanizes this conversation, and it's hard to hate someone that you're looking in the eye. In fact, it's almost impossible unless there's something unwired about you. So if we could take these same technological advances that are perhaps empowering the silos and the divisions and frankly the kinds of things like just happened in New Zealand, could we flip that so that by leading by example, we're teaching maybe thousands, tens of thousands, maybe millions of people. If we distribute this thing, I think we're going to get to distribute this thing through our networks, right? So, are we actually showing people this is how humans work stuff out, and we're leading by example, and we're sticking our necks out a little bit. You guys are sticking your necks out by allowing me to be part of this group. We'll all stick our necks out when we read the comments on Facebook when we post these videos, and there'll be some troll that says that we're a bunch of idiots, and we'll have to get through that together. But to me, like this process is why I'm optimistic about the future. I think we can show people that the real thing that we have in common is our humanity, and good people can come together and talk through our differences, maybe even celebrate our differences, and get out the process at the other end, having taught our neighbors and friends and our Facebook likes how we might do the same thing. So to me, this is very much an experiment, but this is how we Americans have always worked these things out. It ultimately has to be kind of a face-to-face, honest conversation where we call each other out when we get something wrong, but we're trying to get to that point where we're agreeing on some basic rules that we're all going to follow, that's going to make society a better place. So yes, I tell my conservative friends what I'm doing, and they're not always sure what I'm up to, but I think that the product that we've created in this conversation is probably potentially a cool experiment on how we might get lots of other people to sort of take this path instead of just doing trolling on Twitter or something like that. And they could do something better, and this might be it.
Well, and I think too that one of the things that I think has been really powerful and useful about this is that we're not trying to come to some consensus for us all to agree on, for us to take back to our lives and apply them. That we're just simply having a conversation and choosing to be vulnerable and choosing to share ourselves with one another. And that doesn't mean that we have to come to, like, we're not trying to form a resolution or whatever. That I probably will never agree with a lot of your politics and that's totally okay, because that's, we're not trying to reach consensus on what we want everyone to believe about how to solve our problems. We just want to humanize them. And we just, that to me, like that's a powerful, powerful thing. Like that we're not just trying to form a consensus or a resolution, that we're just trying to better understand ourselves, to grow in our understanding, and take the time to listen to the experiences of one another, to broaden our understanding and hopefully to increase our empathy to behaviors that maybe we don't understand, or even sometimes are horrific, to understand like that there's a story behind that story, even if that story is an abomination, that's the practice of what we're doing. And I think that's just hella powerful. And I'm super good for all y'all and getting trolled. Like the stuff that's said about me on YouTube and everywhere else, like I can be your support system for that. Just don't read the comments. That's step one. Don't roll.
Yeah, one of the things that I've loved about this is that I feel like we do all have kind of the same underlying kind of goal or ambition with a conversation like this. And looking at question number 2, who, if anyone, would you have liked to bring into the previous conversations? I would like to I would like to see people at the table who maybe are a little more resistant to, what we're doing, not necessarily what we're doing, but that are like, no, I'm good. I've got my little ways that I thought and the way I'm brought up, and I'm okay thinking that, other people are less than or whatever. And because I see that, like, developing relationships across those giant divides is kind of where those, where change really starts to happen. And then that boils down to relationships. And this is a great format for that to occur. So that's what I would like to see. But I understand that that's sometimes it's hard to get that, maybe those people to come to the table because there's a lot of fear maybe, and maybe they're less willing. So I felt like we're all really willing and anxious to learn from one another in this conversation. And yeah, I guess I'd like to see some more that are a little more resistant, and then we can learn from each other there.
Yeah, so sometimes I kind of call it like Hark space. So like I was doing a men's retreat this past weekend, and one of the questions I asked them was like, who's in your heart space right now? Which is another way of asking, like, who would you want to be at this retreat, but just like isn't here physically, but they're there in your heart. And the reason why I reminded them of that is because once they leave the retreat, it's not like we went into some like alternate dimension where we had a men's retreat and then we came back into this dimension and there was it never existed. We all became something different by participating in our conversation together. And the people that are in their heart space, whether they know it or not, they're part of that transformation too, because as long as they're in relationship with those people, and we own, like if each of us owns what we've gotten out of this conversation, it's gonna naturally transform the people that may seem like one step or two steps or three steps removed. And if we stay authentic, it'll automatically kind of like enfold into those relationships. But we just have to kind of figure out how we can hold that space. So like for me, one of the emotions, number 5 is what emotions come up for you as you think of having future conversations on this subject with others who do not share your point of view, which is kind of like jumping off of what Heather was talking about. And like, I mean, I get a whole bunch of different emotions, one of them's joy, because like 3 minutes before we got on this call, I was feeling like I almost forgot about the possibilities, and I was just about to get on the call, but I could feel my brain trying to like do some entrenching, and because sometimes it's hard for me to express my feelings, because it's one of the things we did in the men's retreat was we talked about, if you don't transform your pain, you'll most definitely transmit it. And I think Richard Rohr said that. And so it's very important to me not to transmit the pain that I've been through in my life, but to rather transform it. But a lot of times with language, you kind of like try to use the best words you know how, or the best whatever. And depending on how the people on the other end hear, they can take something that you meant for a transformative purpose and just say, oh, so you're saying this or you're saying that, you know what I mean? And get into all these like arguments. And so even when your intent is to try to bring people together. So sometimes I feel like this trepidation in terms of like, if I have this conversation with someone who doesn't share my point of view, because they may not understand, like Shannon's point, where we're not trying to make other people, like we're not trying to get, this group of 5 is going to come up with a way of thinking, and then everyone's got to like accept it and download it into their brain so they can be as conscious as we are. Like, I don't think anybody's coming to it from that place. It's just like, this is where I am. And then we hear each other and we just like kind of work it out. But a lot of times when one shares their point of view, the other person hears it as, oh, so you're saying my point of view is wrong just because you have a different point of view. So now we just have to battle. And that's so sad. So that's another emotion that comes up. Is like ever since the election of the president, like I like kind of lost contact with one of my good friends who's conservative, like Republican dude. And I posted something, I try not to say anything like negative about people, but I just kind of like will put out a thought and people can take it one way or the other. I try to be pretty careful. But I put something out, wasn't even really to do with the president or the government necessarily, but some people who know me in the context I'm in now decided to defend my honor because my friend had a comment that he had brought up from like a conservative leaning site and said, well, think about this. And he and I know each other. So when if I talk to him, I'm kind of just like, we just talk. But other people saw it online and they jumped on him and like started calling him like, hey, you can't, and he's white. So they said, look, that's pretty racist of you to say to this black guy, blah, blah, blah. So they were like defending me. And I'm like, oh, wait, you don't have to defend me. Oh, that's my buddy. And he and I, like, I've called him, he didn't call me back. and it hurts. And the other thing that hurts is like with that particular person, which is another emotion I feel about this thing, but there's a joy coming. Even though I keep saying sad and hurt and all this other stuff, and trepidation. But he, out of his choice to live into his conservative values, and I'm kind of leery of telling his story. I'll just say that his way of connecting with what he calls conservative values led him to go and work in a community that's not like him, because he believed that sharing those values would create some kind of opportunity for people that may have been like marginalized, let's say. So I have really a lot of respect for him, even though I don't agree with his politics necessarily. But out of the people who are considered liberal, and a lot of the progressive people and the pundits, and I don't always conflate liberal, progressive with right and left. That's just like, I think people just kind of make that up. But at any rate, he did what neither group does. Like what neither group does, because he lived into his own personal sense of what it meant to have conservative value and went and worked in that community. And those kids like love that dude, you know, and a lot of people don't know his story, you know. And so on the other side, I hope that more stories like his emerge so that people know that you can't just say, oh, a person's conservative and that means that, or they're liberal and that means that, or all these labels. And hopefully, like by us being able to be how we're being together, who come from a bunch of different perspectives, people can say like, oh, wow, they're all talking. There's a lot of different stories. We're learning something and we don't have to be afraid. And we don't know everything. These labels don't encapsulate who a person is. It's just a way of looking at it, but not the way of looking at it, whether it's coming from a racial, ethnic or other variations on those themes. So that was a long way to get into that.
It was good enough. I like it. Yeah.
So we have time that we can keep going through questions as we felt led to go through them.
Yeah. I was just going to say there's so much that I related to in everything that you were just saying. As a matter of fact, it's funny because right now I'm talking to you guys from a school that I sat on the board of directors for in South Central LA, and I won't name the location, but this school was founded by two individuals, one African American and one Anglo American, who are both political conservatives. It's probably the only school in South Central that you'll find with a picture of Ronald Reagan in the hallway, you know. But for these gentlemen, I mean, you know, their conservatism has to do with taking it upon themselves to help those who need help the most, right? And they've literally dedicated their entire professional careers to helping young people and in deprived circumstances get an education and develop opportunity and just obliterate so many of the stereotypes that a person might have about somebody on the basis of maybe their race or their politics and so forth. You know, I have so many conversations all the time with people who, the more you get to know just about any individual, the more they start to obliterate whatever the stereotype you might have about them is. I mean, stereotypes exist for a reason. They convey some general truths, but we never want to settle for stereotypical understandings of people, whether on the basis of race, religion, or political party affiliation. So I guess in that spirit, if thinking about people who I would like to have participate in this conversation who aren't here, I think Matt's boss, Glenn Beck, and Van Jones might be a good pair of people to have on a dialogue like this. It's funny. I mean, I think there's some bad blood there going back a little ways, and yet both of these men, one liberal, one conservative, are individuals who have gone out of their way in subsequent years to sort of recognize the humanity in the other side. I mean, Glenn Beck spoke to, the legitimacy of the concerns of the Black Lives Matter movement when all most other conservatives would do was demonize them. And Van Jones, taking a lot of heat from his side for working with the Trump administration for criminal justice reform, which is this hugely important issue for so many people, and certainly underprivileged folks. People never can get a quick handle on me. I'm kind of like a social justice Republican myself. I mean, I'm a person who, I've run for office, by the way, and I've been in party politics prior to my current work with a group called Better Angels, which is a bipartisan organization that's very sort of in the same lane as Living Room Conversations here. And, I'm a person who's very concerned about inequality. I'm very concerned about what I would consider to be the structures of, oppression in our society. But on the other hand, I'm culturally conservative, and I'm very much a free market sort of individual. And so, I try to craft my own way of looking at things by listening to folks like you guys and sort of taking from the wisdom that everybody around me has to offer, and to, take a little bit from everyone and to try and piece together whatever the truth might be in my limited ability to understand it, And so I just love having these sorts of conversations that allow us to actually to talk about the general truths, but then to really be rooted in who we are as individuals, in speaking to these broader sorts of patterns of social reality. And I think that these types of conversations that allow us to really be who we are and express that are the types of conversations that glue us together more firmly and healthily as Americans, really, and as human beings. They allow us to connect more deeply, and that's what we need.
I will work on Glenn Beck and Van Jones.
I'd love to talk to you about that, by the way.
Yeah, let's talk about it because I think it's a very doable project.
Well, that's good to know. Okay, let's talk.
Yeah.
Well, I'll jump in this one of, is there anything you've been wanting to ask another member of the group but did not feel comfortable doing so? When I wrote this question, I was thinking about, like a lot of times things will be going through our heads when we're having these kind of conversations, but then it's like, I don't want to ask that. I may throw things off or whatever. And then the conversation's over and you never do it. So I kind of like left this opportunity for people to kind of do that. So I actually wanted to ask Heather a question. So like, at least I may sound ignorant before I actually get to my point. But on some level, I'm wondering, because you said like you're in a bubble and different things like that, that I kind of wonder, like a lot of people can get out of these types of conversations. Like they don't have to participate. And on some level, none of us have to. But if you guys will pardon me for a moment, and I'll use an example that may be presumptuous on my part. But like for me, I feel like because I'm Black, I can't like for me, I feel like trying to get out of this conversation is just a disservice to myself, to my family, to my world, and to all people who have been identified as marginalized, right? So I feel like I can't not be in this conversation, whether it's in this capacity or any other capacity, because it's just my life. And I'm projecting on the John that he would be in a similar boat just by virtue of the structure that's set up in our society. And people might look at him and just be like, okay, Shannon, I don't know a lot about her background, but from what I remember from the first conversation, there's some redemptive piece in this too for her, because her background, from what she shared, is like, once you have that awareness, you could either say, oh, that was my past, or you can try to do some redemptive work. So there's that redemptive work there. And then for Matt, I imagine there's like a creature or something waving in Matt's screen.
Yeah, we have.
But
Participants.
Oh, okay. From
Yeah.
Matt's perspective, I imagine there's a couple things. One, that conservative anything is starting to get like a bad rap, generally speaking. He's a white male, which take it for what it's worth. Some people would be like, all right, you guys spoke for a long time in history. Shut up. Everybody else's turn. So, there's that. So, but for you, Heather, because I don't know as much about your background, and you said you're in a bubble, like your choice to be in this conversation is you could just get out of it, I imagine, and you wouldn't have to have like the redemptive thing or any other things like that. You could just be like, I'm a nice white lady. I didn't do anything to hurt anybody. I'm gonna live my life and just be good. But you're choosing this, and once you choose this, I imagine, I've never been a white lady, so I can't really say. I imagine that once you choose something like this, you can't go back in some capacity. You can't like unhave this conversation. So you kind of opened up a can of worms for yourself.
Absolutely.
So I'd like to figure out, understand why you did.
Right. And I love being a part of this because it really has shown the light on the fact that like I have lived with this unawareness of my privilege for most of my life, all the while being really ticked off at the rest of the white people around me who are, exhibiting outward racist qualities. And I don't know if I just kind of thought in my mind, well, I don't agree with them, and so then I'm cool. I don't have to do anything else because I feel like I don't walk around using racial slurs, and I'll call my family members out when they are, and that, like, I guess it's kind of like where it stopped for me. And I think just living in communities that are generally white. I mean, I live on the west side of Indianapolis, and we have diversity, and it's increasing as we've been here for 15 years, and we see a lot more color in our schools. And but just historically, like, I've just been able to really, I don't know, I don't want to say ignore it, but to just not be as affected by it, by the need for the conversation. And me just listening to you guys speak about just the depth in which you have thought about this really shined a light on the lack of really intellectual investment I've made in this conversation. So I'm loving that I'm a part of it. And yes, I think that this is going to spark more investment in conversations like this with people around me, and to encourage more people to hop on board with this. I've told a lot of people that I go to church with about this, and church Sundays are one of the most segregated days of the week, or whatever that saying is, and we actually have some Black people in our church, and so I'm like, oh, come on, let's all get together, and maybe we can have these conversations, in church, where we are often very divided or segregated. Yeah. So did I answer your question in a roundabout kind of a way?
Yeah. I feel like you did.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Matt, you're muted again, brother.
There you go.
Okay. So as the conservative / libertarian white guy here, I always, and for years, every time I have an opportunity to talk about race on TV, like I've gone on Bill Maher, I told everyone earlier that experience I had debating some of these issues on CNN, that for a lot of my conservative friends, they really, particularly white guy conservative friends, they don't really want to have a conversation about race because too often, and you know, a lot of these conversations happen on social media. Too often, someone sort of launches the counterattack with "you're a racist," and there's two things that sort of end a conversation really quickly, and one is you're a racist, and the other one probably is you're a Nazi, and nobody wants to be in a position where they have to say, no, I'm not a racist. So one of the things that I think we're doing by example here is that there's got to be a way to have that conversation and to point out to a white person, you don't understand what Black Lives Matter means to me. There's got to be a way to sort of get people to listen to each other without the name calling, because I think right now the problem is you can't have an honest conversation if there's certain things that are thrown at the other guy, right? Nobody wants to be called a racist unless, I mean, if you're an actual white supremacist, you sort of wear it on your sleeve, and maybe that's a compliment if you're that person. But you know, the rest of us, we don't want to be that guy, and we don't think that we are that guy. So stop ending the conversation before it starts. And who did I trigger?
I can respect that. I'm not gonna say anything else, but I can say I'll respect that, and then somebody else can say something.
I was thinking, like, while we were talking, and this talk speaks to a little bit of what Matt was saying, that particularly in America, I guess, I don't know, my sense is that is particularly in America, that one of the things that leaves particularly young white men vulnerable to escalating their views to a more radical nature in terms of race is because after our last conversation, I've been thinking about language so much, and that because we don't have discussions around race, that there is no awareness of white racial identity. And, you know, I mean, part of that is the structures that have been set up so that we as white people don't have to think about it. But now that there are challenges that are arising in terms of, like, hey, how do we really actually build equity? What does it look like for us to be a genuinely equitable society? How do we go about, making changes in our power structures or whatever? That most white people have never had conversations about race at all, that they have no racial awareness. And so there's a real draw in times of uncertainty, fear, or whatever, that the illusion of racial awareness in terms of the extreme far right, like white supremacy movements, particularly online, like, it sounds like they're the only people, they're the only white people that are really thinking about race on a daily basis. Now, that's the only information that they're getting. And so if you want to find white people who are aware about their race, you're going to primarily only find it in people that have a really skewed sense, in my opinion, a really skewed sense about what their racial identity is. So for me, the idea of trying to expand our conversations to just be able to talk about race and ethnicity and examine our experiences in that, and taking the time to not just share our experiences, but to hear the experiences of people who are fundamentally different from us about their experiences in terms of race and ethnicity, that it will give us more language, and it will give us some other means of being able to communicate in terms of race, or for white people to have a more dynamic view of race, since we haven't had the same challenges of having to be aware of our race and how we operate because of our skin color in terms of the world or whatever. So that's something that makes me very hopeful about this discussion and discussions like this. And I think it's something that we have got to, like, and they might be messy and it might be hurtful and it might be lots of things, but it's like, if we do not begin to actually converse about race, that we are leaving white people, the only racial awareness that they have exposure to is really far right ideas.
I do think that there is a self-conscious racial awareness on the part of many white people on the left, though, in the form of, and actually maybe this is a question that put towards maybe Shannon or Heather here, as something I'm wondering whether or not you guys have ever felt or can relate to anyway, but in the form of the concept of white guilt. I think that there are a lot of people, on the left in particular, maybe a lot of white people, who feel something of a, perhaps as they come to learn more and more about, the history of the founding and subsequent eras of this country and the, power dynamics, which Shannon, you're speaking to here. I think that for many white people, there is something of a latent or even a very sort of conscious sense that there's either some shame in simply being white, or at the very least that being white in America puts you in a position of being sort of morally obligated, perhaps to make up for a legacy of injustice, or to even sort of retreat a little bit in terms of asserting your own opinions or feelings in contexts where other more marginalized people are seeking to express themselves. So I'm wondering if, if either of you two relate to that idea in any way, or if you see that in other white people, this idea of white guilt.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I feel like I felt that, what you described, and like what do you do with that? And it's interesting. I saw someone post an article a week or so ago, kind of around, Black History Month, and it was a Black man who posted it, and he was kind of, I think without calling it that, white guilt, he was kind of addressing it by, hey, white friends, here's kind of what you can do to be an advocate or supportive or whatever. And here are the things that you're currently doing that are kind of like, you need to step away from this. And I can't remember what the specific things that he was calling out, but almost like he was, people would be posting, daily things on Facebook that they just wouldn't normally be posting about, that kind of showing off that, like, hey, I'm a friend of Black, I have Black friends, you know what I'm saying? So like, and it was almost like, look at me, I'm this awesome white person who's going to battle for the Black people. And the guy was like, you need to tone that down, And as I read that, I was like, oh yeah, I could see that. I could name off some people who were like doing that. But so yes, I see that, and it's alive, and it's, good intentions, but not, but because I think we lack these kinds of conversations, people are doing things that maybe aren't as helpful as they could be.
And I mean, I also see that, and it is that experience of the white guilt, not even just in terms of like in like liberal circles, where I think that it definitely, well, I think I'm gonna back up. When we're because we're talking about shame, like we're talking about shame and how shame operates, and what do people do when they experience shame. If you look at, children or, whatever, like how do people operate when they feel shame? Because shame essentially tells you that you are not worthy of love and connection. Some people, in response to feeling shame, look to try to run away from those bad feelings by, through different ways. Some people are like, okay, I'm feeling this and I identify this as shame. I need to, now, identify it as shame so that I can, instead of having something that deteriorates my connection with other people, helps me build connection with other people. But when I hear the term and when I, what is in fact like white guilt or whatever, that to me that this is like shame, that people are they don't understand what to do, and they don't even, there is no mechanism for discussing what the responsibilities are, both on a personal and a systemic level or whatever, that, that so often it's really just this idea like, well, it wasn't, as my grandfather, and yes, I see that this is happening and I feel bad, and, and now I'm, going to cry to make it, to recenter myself in terms of this being so bad for me. But I do think that it's one of the values, immense values, of having conversations with people who are willing to reach across divides or reach across whatever, that it gives you some ability to move through shame to a point where you can say, okay, this is part of the dynamic. That really sucks, and I hate that I have participated in it, even in unconscious ways. I'm going to try to grow my awareness and then just try to do my imperfect best and be willing to be open to correction, and not allow myself to spiral down into shame about it, and just keep building connection wherever I can.
So
It's powerful.
before I forget, I want to throw a plug out. If you guys haven't seen that book called or read the book called Rising Out of Hatred by Eli Saslow, about Derek Black, whose dad started Stormfront. It's a good book to read. When I was reading it, right, I kind of like connected with him emotionally in my heart and started feeling like compassion for him, because I was just like, dang, man, like the struggle that he had in terms of leaving what he knew, you know what I mean? And then leaving that community while simultaneously expanding his heart to accept people that were different than them because of his relationships he built in college and all of that. And on some level, there's this easy sense of like, when you're feeling your own shame and your own guilt and your own feelings of pain, to want to dismiss what someone else is experiencing and say, well, shoot, I mean, he was a neo-Nazi, like he gave language to a lot of this stuff, and, and just like dismiss him, like, whatever, dude, yeah, you should feel bad. You should feel conflict. But I'm gonna just not even put it on other people. For me, like, one of the tenets of my life is to like try to treat people the way I want to be treated. Also treat them the way they want to be treated. And not, like I said before, not transmit my pain, but to transform it. So if I know what it feels like to like be pushed out of a group or something like that, even if it's a white nationalist group, from a human perspective, to realize the struggle it takes to say, I'm gonna think differently than what everything's around me. I'm gonna be different than everything that's around me. That's hard. And I had to do that. And so I can respect a person who's making that struggle, and then how difficult it might be for some people who are still in that and don't necessarily agree, but also don't know what to do. So leaving that in one section, and then talking about like as an individual, there's a lot of, it's a very complicated way to look at this, but like we say, white guilt, white fragility, white privilege, white supremacy. And there's a whole bunch of different labels that are put, and they say, well, this is a white version of all of these things. But I think on a spectrum, all humans struggle in those areas. of like feeling guilt, being fragile, feeling like they're better than other people, all those other things. It's all just human stuff. And while I struggle with this because I've experienced, I had a friend, we didn't really talk about race that much. And then she said, and I might have brought this up before, she said, Pedro, you ever experienced racism? I said, yeah. Then I was like, I remember the first time somebody called me the N-word, and she started crying, and I think I might have mentioned this to you guys instantly. And was like, no, I don't want to hear it. And I was like confused. And that's what somebody might call like white fragility, right? Now, I get that, and I've seen those expressions of all those things. But I think there's a danger just calling it white when it puts them out, it further separates us in my mind. Even though I feel tempted to say it when I see white people doing it, I want to feel like white fragility, white privilege, white supremacy. Like on the inside, I want to say it, but then I don't want to say it because it's like, no, it's just being human and wrestling with lack of knowledge and embarrassment and all the other things that all of us do in our particular context. And it's just the fact that we're in this this nation with this history that we somehow make ourselves, I don't even want to say this because I don't want to get trolled myself. Oh man, I don't want but because I know some people who I consider friends who are on the liberal side, they don't like when I've said before in the past, like I don't like it when you say white privilege. I just let white people say that to each other. Y'all just go do what you got to do when you're working on each other. But I don't like making a special, even the negative stuff, white people have a special version of it. This was like, no, we're all human, man. We're all struggling with this. And race and ethnicity are filters through which we interpret the struggles that we're all going through as humans. And at some point, we all make mistakes. We all coming out have pain. We all got issues, and there's no special pain, really. It's just pain. And then there's the choice of trying to be a part of a healing or moving away from that pain. And I would love for everybody to do that, while simultaneously not trying to take away from the fact that the people are, where they are. When I see what happened in New Zealand, it's not just like, I have family that's Muslim, so I have that part connects to it, but also I connect to it as a Black person. I connect to it as a person of saying, I know what it's like to just walk around and be seen as a suspect. And then for aggressors to come at me when I'm not even thinking about them, and then them say it's my fault because I exist. And that hurts. But at the same time, if I decide that I'm going to be supreme above somebody else and say white people, blah, 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 and put myself in a different, like a supreme position, I'm exacerbating that issue as humans. So it's like, I'd rather just try to say, damn, this hurts. How can I transform this? So that I can make space in my life. So anyway, Shannon has a hard stop, not calling her out, but she has a hard stop. So I want to touch the pulse of the room. When Shannon has to go, do the rest of us want to keep going? And maybe if Shannon has any final words, she might want to say those. And if we want to finish up, we can finish up, which I think we should. So anything you want to say, Shannon?
Just thank you all so much for sharing yourselves and, being, for just being vulnerable enough to share the things that are difficult and the things that we're all struggling with, and, accepting that we might be confused or not have really good language around all the stuff that we're talking about yet. Like, my life has been just infinitely blessed by all of you all, and the experience of this conversation. And I hope that you guys I hope we can all stay in touch after this too, because I would love to continue our conversations, because they've been just really, really profoundly moving and helpful to me. And thank you all for taking the risk of being here.
Yeah, thank you. And once it, like Matt said, once it goes viral and people start talking about us all, positive and negatively, we're gonna have to be like, no, they're okay. Don't judge them.
everybody's judging everybody else all the time. Their judgments are about them. They are not about us. It tells us where they're at, and it has nothing to do with us. That's their experience.
I'm just happy that Pedro's going to get more angry comments than me in the Facebook post. So
There you go. It's spreading the wealth.
Man, please, Lord, no.
Thank you, Shannon. And yeah, let's definitely keep in touch. Want to keep in touch with everybody and follow up with you
Thank you all
too.
so much.
Yeah. Take
All
care.
right.
bye.
Heather, reach out to me too.
Yeah, I
about
was gonna say, I'm calling you. I have
Awesome.
questions.
Please.
Okay.
See you, Shannon.
Bye.
And then there were 4.
Oh,
So
even
we got a couple minutes to, we got a few minutes we can keep going through whatever conversation questions we haven't gotten to, if you want to, and then we can just do the reflections and then go from there. So anybody want to jump in, feel free. I'm curious why you said I'm gonna get more trolls, Matt.
So I think our strategy. So you said some things that are going to upset your liberal friends, and I said some things that are going to upset some of my conservative friends. And I think the strategy should be to get the trolls to turn on each other.
There you go. That's the point.
Yeah. And maybe they'll chase each other off the internet, and we can have a civil conversation.
We could only hope.
Yeah. Yeah. I realize that that's ridiculous.
Well, they
they
feel like they got to share their voice.
It is a good point, though. I mean, people do have to be willing to say things that it's more important, and it demonstrates more character to say things that your friends will disapprove of than that your, presumed enemies or opponents will, And if you can manage, not that we should be trying to deliberately tick off our friends necessarily, but, but it takes people who are willing to sort of see outside, I guess, the comfortable narrative of the people who they otherwise have more in common with, to be able to speak those truths, to actually open up the space for folks on the other side who might want to have a good faith conversation to say, well, hey, I appreciate that. So that gives me permission to be honest about something that I wasn't going to be honest about necessarily in turn until I heard you do it, So yeah, it's powerful. Yeah, it's funny because, like I said before, people, I'm used to being criticized by, like, my Black liberal friends and so forth for keeping company with conservatives, and then around conservatives, I'm used to being criticized for giving so much credence to left-wing social perspectives on various things, And so I say, I enjoy these sorts of conversations with people like yourselves, and I really think that there is sort of a swelling of this type of, consciousness, I guess, in this country right now. I feel it. I mean, and maybe just because of my line of work, I'm in better position to see it than others. But the type of conversation that we've had here, it's been longer and gone a little deeper than some others, but these are conversations that I see people having. And sooner or later, it's going to reset the paradigm again in terms of the character of, like, our culture and our country, I think. So I'm hoping for it.
Anybody want to touch one of the other questions before we get into reflection and next steps?
I don't think I jumped right to reflection, didn't I?
That's fine. It doesn't. I mean, we're. I think one of the benefits of having had this many conversations together is we've already established like a conversational norm, so we can be more fluid, which is a benefit to people watching this in the future to say, hey, once I get to know the people, I can kind of, be a little bit more liberal.
We know each other pretty well.
Listening. Yeah. What were you gonna say, Heather?
Oh, I guess I'm trying to pick what question. I can't remember what I was saying before. So one sentence, share what was most meaningful, valuable to you in the experience of the littering conversation. I think I'm gonna have to go back and and just rewatch it. Just the topics that were discussed and the depth of the I don't even know. I don't even have a language to even describe it. But just really the depth that was present here was this was way deeper than what I had anticipated in a really good way. And to take my sight, I feel like I have a really short-sighted view of race and ethnicity, and that like, oh, there are some definitely deeper waters that I can be walking in, and that, you know, maybe I should start to pursue that. And yeah, so I think that I'm probably going to read the book that you suggested, or some resource. That one of the questions here is, are there any resources you'd like to share? So I'm definitely going to be taking down, you know, the things that you guys have been digging into, and starting. Well, I started here, continue with that there.
Yeah, resources are real cool because, like, I mean, books and movies and different things like that, I mean, they don't solve everything, but it does kind of create, expand your imaginative capacity. So then you're like, so like, I'll read stuff that I'm like, if my brain says, oh, I have no business reading it, then I'll read it just to make myself go. Like, I went through a thing where I read some like romance novels for like Amish people. And I was like, I saw it and I was like, that's the last thing I'll ever read. And then I was like, oh no, why'd I think that? Let me read this.
Oh,
And
no. That's actually a thing.
Yeah, it's like people get really intense about holding hands. But it opened up my imagination to think like there's people that are walking around saying like, oh my God, they're gonna hold my hand, and they're like 18. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. You know what I mean? Expands your horizons. And so many of us, I feel like so many of us just want to be right. Like that's just where we are. I just want to be right. It's like the greatest feeling ever to just be right. And so we just don't want to hear anything else. And I just don't want to be like that, you know? So if I find myself being that way, I just try to push myself. Because I just feel like if I kind of like justify other people doing that if I do it, you know what I mean? In my mind. So I just decide not to, which isn't always easy. Sometimes I get headaches trying to understand where other people are coming from, but it's worth it, I guess. Yeah, so let's see. I mean, I feel like we're naturally flowing into reflection, and we're kind of there. There were a couple of things that I imagined, but this isn't the last conversation we might have, whether, you know, individually or collectively. There's some more things about ethnicity, ethnic distinction that I hoped came up, but at the same time, this was like the natural flow of it. So I kind of appreciate the natural flow. And I hope that, you know, other people who watch it will just kind of use this as a jumping off point for whatever touches their heartstrings. So my next step in terms of this is that I keep participating in different levels and in different opportunities, and keep stepping into that discomfort and connecting with people who are willing to just share like this. So, yep.
So we could talk about this afterwards, but I'd love to keep the conversation, the strategic conversation going about how we might engage other people that would love to do this kind of thing. This is the fundamental strategy of living room conversations. And I wonder if we can't sort of keep this team together as we engage all of our communities. A lot of us have probably substantial distribution networks either in our community or online, and you know, let's try to do something with this, because I do think that the only way to be the counterbalance to the hate and the trolls is to lead by example. So I for one would love to just I view all of this as an experiment, and put it out there, and yeah, we're going to have to keep our skin's going to have to be a little bit thick, because there'll be some jerks that show up for the conversation, but that shouldn't distract us from our mission.
Yeah, and that we need to also maybe figure out how to hug them. You know what I mean? Because I think people aren't jerky for no reason. They just like they're feeling left out. Like when they start hearing it, and they might witness us having this conversation and be like, I couldn't talk to all these different people. They stink, you know.
Yeah.
And then it's like, if we can figure out a way to be like,
yep.
Hey man, I know you're like us, but if you ever want to, there's room for you too. They might say, go to heck, but not heck. But you know what I mean?
Well, they won't say that.
Yeah. I'm just being PG.
I know.
Well, you know, without getting too religious, I do think that what you're describing, Pedro and Matt, I am 100% with you on the strategic conversation. Willing to get on that right away. But I think that this is the power of the example of Christ. I mean, whether you believe in the Bible or not, I think that the transformative power of love that Jesus demonstrates in the gospel is what it is, because he's sort of in turning the other cheek to people who not only curse you, but strike you and abuse you and otherwise take advantage of you, and praying for and loving your enemies. What you do is you manage to engage those who oppose you without feeding the fires of hatred that fuel their animosity. So, you know, it may be that you're dealing with somebody who has a smaller amount of hatred or ill will, and by not returning that, you're able to sort of show them a different way of looking at you very quickly. It may be that you're dealing with people who have deep reservoirs of hatred, and you have to sort of absorb that negativity in an ongoing basis for a long time. That takes real kind of spiritual endurance. And I think that's why the Bible says that love is long suffering, you know. But in the end, eventually, if you do not feed a fire, the fire burns out, you know. And I think that that's really kind of the revolution of our time. I mean, everybody likes to talk about revolution, left-wing revolution, right-wing revolution. But, you know, I think the revolution of the heart is sort of, you know, the root of a renaissance in society, if you will. And I think that that's the movement in which I believe that I hope to see consolidated. And so, again, I say, you know, just that I see this happening here with you guys. I see this as an extension of the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and nonviolence, and, you know, the idea of love as a transformational power. It really does go beyond ideology and race, tribe, so forth, you know. It just makes this a powerful moment of opportunity for goodness, I think. And that matters so much more to me than liberalism or conservatism or white or black or any of that.
Yeah.
All right, your turn, Heather.
Already talked. I can't follow that.
All right.
I love the analogy with the, you know, I'm tracking with the Christ and.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and for people, you know, one of the things I learned through the trajectory of having these conversations and different expressions is, like, even people who don't use a religious language or certain language like turns them off, is just like that having that willingness to let go of our attachment to what a word means to us. If we have a few minutes, I know that Matt has to go, but in a 3 or 4 minutes. But I would tell you guys a cool story. Like, I was driving my daughter to school this morning, and she was looking at the clouds, and when she said, "Oh, look, there's a face in the clouds," and I was like, "Oh yeah, I see that face." And then she said, "Oh, it's Donald Trump," and I said, "What?" And she said, "That's Donald Trump's face." And then I looked at it and I said, "Oh, yeah, that does look like Donald Trump a little bit." And then she said, "And now the cloud's moving. Now it looks like," she started saying like different things that she saw. And then at some point, every time she would describe what she saw, I could see it too. But then she said, "Oh, now I see a hat for a pharaoh. And then I was like, what? And I forgot what a hat of a pharaoh looked like. So I said, well, I don't see it. And then she started to get frustrated. It's just like, it's right there. I'm like, how can you not see it? It's right there. And I was like, I don't see it. And I said, but you don't know how to get frustrated with each other. It's just, you see it and I don't see it. And then eventually she described what a pharaoh hat looked like. And I said, oh, I forgot that's what it looked like. Oh yeah, are you including the blue part? She said, yeah. I was like, oh, now I see it. I was only looking at the white part. So that's why I couldn't see it. And I didn't remember what a pharaoh hat looked like. And then she was like, okay. And she felt better because then I saw it too. And then I stopped her and I said, you know what, this is a really cool exercise. Like, I learned from you in this moment, but I also want you to remember this. Like, it's just a cloud, actually. It's not a pharaoh hat. It's not Donald Trump. It's not a woman on a chariot. It's not a tornado. It's not all the things you see. It's just a cloud. And because I have the same frame of reference generally, I can see what you see. But when you said, when I stopped having that frame of reference, I couldn't see it anymore. But that's not a reason to get mad at me, you know? It's just I can't see it. So if we kind of try to keep working at explaining it, and at the same time realizing that the cloud's just a cloud, we don't have to be attached. We can just still have like a nice drive to school. And then and I just thought that was like kind of cool, you know. And I think that that's what we're doing. Like, we're looking at this landscape of race and ethnicity and everything. And we came from different perspectives, but then we shared so we can see what each other sees. And then things are what they are. So I appreciate all of you for listening to that story, but also being a part of this and like looking at this together and sharing what you see, so that we can see what each other sees and see what we see. And then as this conversation expands, more and more people hopefully be able to do that.
There's a Judy Collins song about clouds that would work really well right now. But I
have no idea.
I feel what you're saying.
I'll Google her.
Yeah, check it out.
Yeah,
absolutely.
All right. Mm-hmm. So we got like 10 seconds. Anybody want to say bye-bye? Any got any last words? I really appreciate this, guys. And I hope this gets to whoever needs it. Yeah, and shout out to Shay and Shannon who had to, Shay who wasn't here today, and Shannon who had to leave, and appreciate them, and Living Room Conversations, and Joan and everyone who made this possible for us and put in all the work so that we can be here today. Like, much gratitude to them. And people of goodwill and all the different organizations that you guys represent as well, because that's all that cultivation is what got us here today. So
yes,
grateful for everybody.
And thank you, Pedro, for having shepherded this so well. You really brought your heart to it, and better for having heard you. So yeah, let's keep at it.
Yeah, thanks. Yep, we're all in each other's emails, so let's see what happens. Once it gets launched, there's nothing we can do about it anyway. Once it gets planted and watered, we're gonna be a part of it regardless.
Right.
There you go. Much more the beginning than the end. All right, folks. I'm looking forward to what's next.
All right, see you, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.
Take care.
Take care. Yeah, bye.